Hello to Frontiers of Interaction 2012. This is Kevin Kelly. I bid you good day, and I'm really delighted to be here and to have a conversation with you. I'm not sure who you mean by we, whether you mean Lone Owl Foundation or people in general, but let me answer it with people in general first. And that is, I think one of the things that's happened is that since the year 2000, the future has become less desirable. The next 10,000 years is not as fashionable, not as cool as it used to be. And I think it's because before the year 2000, we all had an idea of what the year 2000 would be like. It would be jetpacks, and we'd have time machines, and we'd have moving sidewalks and instant meals, and it was the future. The future was the year 2000 for many, many years, and that's what we had. It was kind of a 1950s view of the future as technology solving all our problems. I think by the time we came to the year 2000, we still had a little bit of that sense of it being this big, wide open heaven in some senses. But in the years since 2000, we've had a lot of economic challenges. We have continued environmental challenges. And I think people have gradually become smarter, or maybe more skeptical about the future, realizing that for everything that is delivered, there's a payment, a penalty, some price to pay. And so right now, 10 years later, 12 years later, there is no plausible future that anybody wants to live in. There's no picture of a future anywhere in the future, whether it's next year or 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now, that anybody can say, I really want to live in that future. And I think that's been a big change, where we'll take the good things that come, but there's no kind of rush. There's no sense of people wanting to purchase a one-way ticket to the future. I think if I offered a one-way ticket to the future in the year 2000, I'd have a lot of people stand in line to get it. And I think if you offered a one-way ticket to the future now, people are not so eager to go, because there is a sense in which there's not going to be a world there that they actually want to live in. And I believe that it's there. I just don't think we have the capability, or we haven't applied ourselves to actually try to present that scenario. I think what technology wants is what life wants. And I want to be sure that you understand that by the word technology, we should mean the system of technology. It's not your iPhone or automobile tire or light bulb. It's the entire system of technologies that support the hundreds of technologies that it takes to make the iPhone, and the hundreds of technologies that it takes to support each one of those. It forms an ecology, an ecosystem of technology as a whole. And as a whole, that technium exhibits behavior that's very close to what evolution of life and life as a whole exhibits. Not an individual species, but the system of life. And I suggest that the technium, the technology, is an extension, an acceleration even, of life. And that if we can find out what life as a system through evolution wants, we have an idea of what the technium wants, and what I think my examination of what life wants shows that it wants to become more complex, more diverse, more specialized, more social, mutualistic, and more evolvable, meaning that the nature of the system can change faster and faster, can evolve new ways of evolving. It's accelerating the entire process. So that's what technology wants. It wants more choices and possibilities and degrees of freedom in our world. It's making kind of more species of things, more ideas, more choices, more possibilities. And that is what we get from technology. Yeah, I think that, again, what technology wants is complexity and diversity and specialization. So I think as we make a global economy, as we make kind of one large technological machine, the value of being different increases. It is difference that propels wealth, it propels progress. Think different. It's being able to have a different idea. But in order to have that difference make a difference, you have to be connected. So there's this kind of weird stance where there's lots of, we'll call them, say, tribes in the Amazon who think differently, but they're not really connected to the global system, so they aren't affecting the system itself. There's other places that are connected to the system, but they're no different. It's a McDonald's on the highway. It's the same. The real power is in being connected globally and being different, maintaining some difference while being connected to the global. That is the real crux. And so places, people, companies that can be connected to the globe and yet cultivate a difference, that is where the true value is, that you are part of the global mind, but you have a different idea. And so I think that we will see great effort made to try and cultivate differences, maintain differences in local areas and places while being connected. It's not easy because you want to become the same. If you're too different, you're not connected. You have to be kind of connected and different. And I think that's really the real challenge. So for those who haven't read my book, I devoted a chapter of it to the Unabomber. And the Unabomber is, this person who was very anti-technology. Excuse the phone, it's my parents' house here. And the Unabomber rejected the benefits of technology, saying that technology was a system, a vast system, but that it was a system that was biased towards taking away freedoms from individuals. And I quote the Unabomber because I agree with him that it's a very large system that has its own agenda. However, I think it's, unlike him, I think that it's a system that actually provides us more freedoms than it takes away. So I think the overall gain of technology is that it increases choices and possibilities. And so while I think there is a kind of a popular cultural skepticism of the future, I believe that that's wrong, and that in fact the future will provide us a better place than today. It's just that we are constrained by our imagination to imagine how that would be. So I agree with the Unabomber and maybe people in Europe that there is a system of the technique. There's a system that's beyond us, that's impersonal, that has its own agenda, that's out of our total control. We have some control. But I believe that this system actually is civilization, and it provides benefits over time, increasing choices and options. I think right now we're at a point where it's very hard for us to see what that looks like as we go forward. But I do believe that it will go forward even if we can't see it. However, I think if we can imagine, if we're able to try to imagine these very optimistic scenarios, that it actually will help us get there in better shape. So I believe optimism is actually something that increases good behavior and for us to make good choices. So returning to the question of how the long now has changed over 10 years in our view of the future, I think we have come to see the importance of optimism in despite an environment where there's lots of pessimism. That optimism and believing that the future will be better, that's what technology creates, actually gives us space to make decisions that may not play out for several generations. You can't do that unless you're optimistic. You can't start programs that may not bear fruit or results for 10 years or 15 years unless you're an optimist. So in order to be responsible for long-term thinking, you almost by default have to become an optimist. Yeah, I mean, I think the history of the technium, the history of civilization, is one of increasing socialness, social connections. That's true in biology, and that's true in the technium as well. And so I think a lot of the benefits that we can imagine, again, in the near future are all going to come about us finding new ways and new powers of connecting with each other. At the same time, and this is a very curious thing, at the same time as we become more connected together, we can also increase our individual freedoms. There is a kind of a resident political philosophy that says that there's a trade-off, that in order to increase individual freedom, you have to decrease social freedom, and in order to have increasing social group, you must decrease individual. And I think that's wrong, and I think we're going to reject it and show that you can actually elevate both at once. You can actually elevate the power and the action and the freedom of the individual while you also elevate the power and freedom of the group. They seem contradictory, but actually I think this is one of the huge discoveries that we're making right now. And we have it, and I think there's so much kind of a no better example than maybe Wikipedia. Okay? Wikipedia is something that is made by the group, and yet Wikipedia allows any individual total freedom to make a change. There's no other former work of a text that allowed any individual that kind of freedom. But here you have maximum individual freedom, and you have this powerful of the group. And that's a little bit what we've seen in capitalism. That was a great discovery of capitalism, by allowing individual peoples to have this sort of selfish interest. You take a lot of self-interest, which maximizes the individual, and you got this phenomenal marketplace that actually was a coherent social development of tremendous power. And so I think we're about to move into an area where we're going to see the fact that we can elevate both individuals and the group at the same time, and all in new ways using technology that allow us to have these kind of interactions and relationships that were not possible before. I think, particularly over 10,000 years, maybe even 1,000 years, maybe even hundreds of years, we'll have translation machines working between us. This conversation right now would be mediated by some kind of translation where I would appear to be speaking perfect Italian, and you would appear to me to be speaking the English beautiful English that you're now speaking. But even if you did one, and I think that's really the vision. And so the question becomes: would anybody ever, really want to learn English if you didn't have to, or would anybody even ever learn another language since you didn't have to if you had that interface, the technology that would allow it? And that's my vision. My vision is that we all still have our native tongue, and there may even be more of them, and more a reason to keep that local and regional, to keep that kind of that color, that texture, that very, very diversity. Again, that's what technology wants, is diversity. So we should maintain that diversity of language. And there will be, a couple of languages that will be used for other purposes of global communication. But a lot of this will be done with translation machines. They will become, the more people use them, the better they will get. And they will become so good, they'll become better than people in terms of translators. They will be instantaneous, in real time. And that will solve a lot of the problems of this kind of across borders, across cultural line translation. But it's, there's likely to be a common language for people who want to speak face-to-face, do business, and whatever. But I think technology is going to change our ideas about language, as it has everything else. Yes, of course. Of course. Yes, machines want what life wants. Life wants to speak. In biological evolution, little tiny brains are invented again and again in many different, insects and starfish and invertebrates and vertebrates everywhere in the taxon. Evolution keeps making brains, and the higher, more developed brains want to communicate. So there is a sense in which evolution of life wants to communicate, wants to make language of some sort. The languages will be different. That's the whole point, is increased diversity. But yes, I think there is an urge in evolution and in the Techian to communicate, to more socialness, and to communicate in the group, and that suggests types of language. So as we make machines, and as we make them more diverse, as we give them more power, as we let them evolve and help them evolve faster and faster, they want to speak. They want to say something. They want to communicate with other machines, with themselves. It's inherent in the very nature of this life process. And so, yes, machines want to speak themselves. It will be a long time before we see something like that, but it will come slowly. Thank you for hosting me and for having me. Thank you for allowing me to appear at the Frontiers of Interaction 2012. And it was a real joy to be here. I wish you all the best, and ciao.